The moment the lawyer said the words, Ward Ranch, the saloon died. 1 second, it was a room full of noise and smoke. The next, it was a tomb. Men froze with glasses halfway to their lips. The piano player's hands hovered over the keys, paralyzed. You could have heard a beat of sweat drop from 100 feet away. And in the center of that deafening silence sat Ruby Callahan, a girl with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and a deed that felt like a rattlesnake in her hands. She'd been called to town for the reading of a will from a man she'd never met, a man named Silas Ward. Now the lawyer, a twitchy little fella named Clyde Baxter, was telling her she owned 3,000 acres of land, a ranch house, and every splinter of wood and speck of dust on the property. It made no sense. Girls like Ruby didn't inherit fortunes. They earned pennies breaking horses for men who owned fortunes. Clyde Baxter cleared his throat, and the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Miss Callahan, he whispered, leaning so far over the table she could smell the fear on his breath. This is not a simple inheritance. He told her the ranch had been empty for 5 years. He told her folks from town wouldn't go near it, not for a fistful of gold. Ruby just stared at the deed. The paper was real. The ink was real. But the look in Clyde's eyes was wrong. Why? She asked, her voice steady. What happened out there? The lawyer's face went white. He looked over his shoulder, like he expected to see a ghost standing behind him. Silas Ward was a private man. He didn't like visitors. He had things out there he wanted to protect. He leaned in even closer. Valuable things. That was all Ruby needed to hear. She had no family, no home, no future. This ranch, with all its secrets and its silence, was the only chance she'd ever get. I'm going, she said, and her own voice surprised her. Clyde's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His fingers were like ice. There's a condition, Miss Callahan. You have to spend 7 straight nights on the property. Alone. In the main house. Only then does it become yours. He paused, his grip tightening. You should know. 13 people have tried before you. A cold dread washed over Ruby. And? Clyde's voice dropped so low it was barely a sound. They went looking for what Silas was hiding. Some got scared and ran after the first night. The greedy ones. The ones who tried to take what wasn't theirs. They were never seen again. 13 people. 13 people had walked onto her land and vanished from the face of the earth. Any sane person would have torn that deed to shreds, walked out of that saloon, and never looked back. But Ruby had spent her whole life being told she was reckless. Maybe it was time to prove them right. I'm still going. The money was more than she could make in 100 lifetimes. It was a new start. It was everything. Defeat washed over Clyde's face. Then may God have mercy on you, he sighed, letting go of her wrist. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a heavy iron key. It was old, black, and cold to the touch. Strange symbols, like nothing she'd ever seen, were carved into its head. This opens the front door, he said. The will is specific. You have to sleep in the main house. Nowhere else. What do these symbols mean? She asked, turning the key over in her palm. I have no idea, Clyde said, and for the first time Ruby thought he might be lying. Silas Ward wasn't a man who shared his secrets. The ride out to the Ward Ranch was 3 hours of lonely. The land grew emptier with every mile. The birds stopped singing. The wind died down. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for her. The road turned to a dirt track, overgrown with thorns that tore at her boots and her horse's legs. Then she saw it. The ranch house was a monster. 3 stories of dark wood and stone, crouched against the horizon like a predator. It didn't reflect the afternoon sun. It seemed to swallow it. Windows like vacant eyes stared down at her. It was abandoned, yes, but not ruined. Someone had been keeping the roof from caving in, keeping the walls from falling down. But why? She tied her horse to a post that was rotting into the ground and walked toward the front door. And that's when her heart stopped. Footprints, fresh footprints in the dust, leading right up to the front porch. They were deep, made by a heavy man in size 10 or 11 boots. The left heel was worn down in a way that was unique, and they were fresh. No more than a day or two old. Someone had been here, and they might still be inside. Her hand went to the revolver at her hip. She had 6 shots, and the intruder had no idea she was coming. She climbed the porch steps, and each board groaned like it was in pain. The air grew thick with the smell of dust and something else, something metallic and wrong. The iron key slid into the lock like it had been used just yesterday. It turned without a sound. The front door swung open with a shriek that echoed through the house, a scream that went on and on. Ruby stepped inside, gun raised, and finally understood why the saloon had fallen silent. This wasn't a house. It was a shrine to madness. Every single wall, in every room she could see, was plastered with newspaper clippings. Hundreds of them, thousands, yellowed, overlapping, pinned up in a chaotic collage, and the headlines all screamed the same things. Missing persons, unexplained deaths, strange sightings. In the center of each wall was a huge map of the territory, dotted with dozens and dozens of little red pins, each pin marking a place where someone had simply disappeared. She walked deeper into the house. In the parlor, the furniture was draped in white sheets like ghosts waiting for a party. But someone had been here. The dust on the sheets was disturbed. There were clear handprints where someone had pulled them back to look underneath. The kitchen told an even clearer story. A plate with dried crumbs sat on the table. A tin cup held the dark dregs of old coffee. Whoever was here hadn't just visited. They had been living here. But the most chilling part? They were gone now. There wasn't a sound in the whole house. A grand staircase led to the second floor. Ruby took the steps one at a time, her revolver leading the way. The metallic smell got stronger up here, pulling her toward a single closed door at the end of a long, dark hallway. She put her ear to the wood. Nothing. Not a breath, not a shuffle. Just the dead, heavy silence of the house. Taking a deep breath, she turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room wasn't a bedroom, it was an office, and it was filled, floor to ceiling, with tall metal filing cabinets. Dozens of them. Each one was labeled with a year, going back 2 decades. Her eyes scanned the labels, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. And then she saw the last cabinet, the newest one. The label on it made her blood freeze in her veins. Current subjects. Active monitoring. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely pull the drawer open. It was stuffed with files. Each file was a thick folder on a missing person. It had their photograph, their history, their last known whereabouts. And inside each file, there was something else. A small glass vial, sealed with wax, containing a single drop of dried, brown blood. But it was the file right on top that shattered her world. The folder was labeled with her full name, Ruby Callahan. And the picture inside wasn't a photograph. It was a hand-drawn sketch of her face, rendered in terrifying detail. Someone had been watching her, studying her, for a very long time. She forced her trembling fingers to open the file. Page after page documented her life, what time she woke up, where she worked, the people she talked to, her entire existence, cataloged by a phantom. The notes went back years, detailing her parents' death, every town she'd lived in, every horse she'd broken. This wasn't just monitoring, this was an obsession. And at the very bottom of the file, tucked beneath the last page of surveillance notes, was a letter. The paper was heavy, the ink was fresh, and it was addressed to her. Miss Callahan, it began. If you are reading this, then you have done exactly as I'd hoped. My name is Silas Ward. You are not here by accident. You are here because your father, Thomas Callahan, was my partner. And before he died, he left something in my care. Something men would kill for. I have spent 20 years searching for the rightful heir. You, Ruby, are that heir? A floorboard creaked downstairs. Ruby froze, the letter clutched in her hand. It wasn't the old house settling. It was a footstep, slow, heavy, deliberate. The man with the worn-down boot heel was back, and he was in the house with her. She shoved the letter into her pocket, her revolver suddenly feeling tiny and useless in her hand. She crept out of the office and peered down the long, dark staircase. The footsteps had stopped, but she could hear something else now. Breathing, labored and heavy, coming from the kitchen. He was waiting for her. He knew she'd found the room. He knew she'd read the letter. She went down the stairs, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. Each step groaned under her weight, announcing her descent. At the bottom, she pressed herself flat against the wall and risked a glance around the corner. A man was sitting at the kitchen table, his back to her. He was big, wearing a dusty coat, his gray hair a mess. His hands were resting flat on the table, perfectly still. "You can lower the gun, Ruby Callahan," the man said, his voice calm and steady. He didn't even turn around. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Edgar Pratt. I'm the one who's been watching you." Ruby stepped into the doorway, her gun still aimed at the center of his back. "You've been living here? You wrote those files?" Edgar turned slowly in his chair. His face was a roadmap of exhaustion and deep, abiding sadness. But his eyes knew her. "You have your father's eyes," he said softly. "I've been continuing Mr. Ward's work, watching over you, waiting for you to be ready." "Ready for what?" she demanded. "Why me? Why this house?" "Because your father and Silas found something out in the mountains 20 years ago," Edgar said, his voice low and urgent. "Something that wasn't on any map, a lost cache of Confederate gold." The words hung in the air. Confederate gold. It was a myth, a campfire story told by old prospectors. But Edgar wasn't telling stories. The weight in his voice was real. "Where is it?" Ruby breathed. "Hidden," Edgar said. "Your father got sick before they could move it. Consumption. On his deathbed, he made Silas promise to keep it safe for you. But he had one condition." Edgar's eyes bored into hers. "He insisted you prove you were worthy of it, that you had the courage to defend it. That's what the 7 nights are about. It's a test. Your father's final test." The pieces started clicking into place. The fear in town. The 13 who disappeared. It wasn't a haunting. It was a guard. "The other 13, she started. Edgar's face hardened. "They failed the test. They got greedy. When they realized what was hidden here, they tried to take it. Silas, he gave them a choice. Leave or be removed. They chose poorly." "Silas killed them," Ruby whispered, horrified. "He protected your inheritance," Edgar corrected grimly. "A burden that now falls to me. Because the gold is still here, Miss Callahan, hidden somewhere on this property, and we are not the only ones who know it's here." A new kind of fear, sharp and immediate, pierced through Ruby's shock. "What do you mean?" Edgar stood and walked to the grimy kitchen window, peering out at the dying light. "Others are coming. I've seen them circling for weeks, like vultures. They've been waiting for the heir to show up, waiting for you to lead them right to it." "Who are they?" "Professionals," Edgar said, turning back from the window. His eyes were hard as flint. "They move like soldiers. They're not just going to kick down the door. They've been watching, planning. They think they're coming for a frightened girl and a tired old man." He walked over to a section of the kitchen floor and pried up a loose board, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. It was filled with rifles and boxes of ammunition. "This was never just about staying 7 nights in a scary house, Ruby. It was about proving you could fight for what's yours." He pulled out 2 rifles, passing one to her. It was heavy, oiled, and perfectly maintained. "They'll come tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "After dark. They think we're sheep. It's time to show them we're wolves." But before they could prepare, before they could even load the rifles, a voice echoed from the front porch. A calm, authoritative voice that didn't sound like a thief in the night. "Edgar Pratt, Ruby Callahan, we know you're in there. This is Sheriff Morrison. I have a warrant for your arrest." Ruby and Edgar exchanged a look of pure confusion. The sheriff? Why would the sheriff be here? "A warrant for what?" Edgar yelled back, moving to the side of the front window to peer out. "For the murders of 13 missing persons," the sheriff's voice boomed, "and for conspiracy to hide stolen federal property. A witness has come forward. Mr. Clyde Baxter sends his regards." The lawyer, the twitchy, terrified lawyer, had set them up. He was never afraid for her. He was afraid of her. He had been playing a different game all along. Edgar looked at Ruby, his face grim. He must have been working with them. He knew the legal process would bring you here, and he tipped off the sheriff to be waiting. So we're trapped, Ruby said, her mind racing. The law is outside, and soldiers are coming. Not exactly, Edgar said, a faint, grim smile touching his lips. He pointed toward a heavy cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. Silas and your father were military men. They never planned for just one way out. He moved the cabinet aside, revealing a small iron-banded door set into the wall. He produced a key from his pocket, a key that looked remarkably similar to the one Clyde had given her, and unlocked it. A wave of cool, earthy air washed over them from the darkness beyond. The gold is down there, Edgar said, along with everything we need to survive. This house is more than a home, Ruby. It's a fortress, and the real test is about to begin. Ruby followed Edgar down a set of narrow stone steps, the heavy door swinging shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. Edgar struck a match and lit an oil lamp, revealing a space that took her breath away. It wasn't a basement, it was a bunker. The tunnel opened into a large excavated chamber. The walls were lined with racks of rifles, pistols, and shotguns. Crates of ammunition were stacked neatly to the ceiling. Maps and strategic plans were pinned to wooden boards. It was a fully stocked military command post. Your father and Silas were Confederate quartermasters, Edgar explained, his voice echoing in the stone room. They saw the war was lost. They decided to secure a pension for themselves and their men. This gold wasn't stolen from the treasury. It was a payroll for a ghost army that never got paid. Officially, it never existed. He led her to the far side of the bunker. There, stacked on wooden pallets, were dozens of heavy wooden crates. Edgar took a crowbar and pried the lid off one of them. It was filled with gold bars, each one stamped with the faded seal of the Confederate States of America. Ruby stared, speechless. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. It was a king's ransom. This is what they died for, she whispered. This is what your father wanted you to live for, Edgar corrected. He knew wealth like this would attract predators. He built this place to give you a fighting chance to keep it. A muffled shout came from above, followed by the splintering crash of the front door being kicked in. The sheriff and his men were inside the house. They'll be looking for the cellar entrance, Edgar said calmly, handing her a loaded rifle. But they won't find this one, not yet. He pointed to a large map of the ranch tacked to the wall. It was covered in red and blue lines. This house is a maze. Secret passages, tunnels. The whole property is wired. Wired with what? Ruby asked. Your father was clever with explosives, Edgar said with a grim smile. We can't fight the law head on, but we can make them regret ever stepping foot in this house. He pointed to a different tunnel entrance on the opposite side of the bunker. That one leads out to the old well, 100 yards from the house. It's our escape route. But first, we need to send a message. He handed her a strange-looking device with a plunger on top. Wires ran from it into the stone walls. The front port, he said. The sheriff and his men are likely gathered there. This will get their attention. Give us time to get out. Ruby looked at the plunger, then back at Edgar. This was more than a test of courage. This was war. She thought of Clyde Baxter's betrayal, of the sheriff trying to steal her birthright under the color of law. She thought of her father, dying alone, trusting his partner to protect his only child. She pushed the plunger down. A deep rumbling boom shook the bunker, and dust rained down from the ceiling. A chorus of panicked shouts erupted from the house above. They had their diversion. Go! Edgar yelled, grabbing a bag filled with ammunition and supplies. To the well! They ran through the second tunnel, a long, damp passage that smelled of earth and stone. It sloped upwards, and soon they could see a faint circle of starry sky above them. They emerged from the stone-lined well, gasping in the cool night air. The ranch house stood silhouetted against the sky, but now the front porch was a crater of splintered wood and smoking debris. Men were shouting, confused and angry, but their escape wasn't clean. As they crouched in the tall grass, a figure separated from the chaos at the house. A single man, moving with the quiet confidence of a hunter, began circling the property, his rifle held at the ready. He wasn't one of the sheriff's bumbling deputies. He was different. That's one of them, Edgar whispered, his voice tight with tension. The soldiers I told you about. They must have been waiting for the sheriff to make his move. The man was methodical, his eyes scanning the darkness. He was moving in their direction. They were out of the house, but they were still trapped on the property, caught between a corrupt lawman and a team of professional killers. "We need to get off this land," Ruby whispered. "My horse is still tied up by the front." "Too dangerous," Edgar countered. "They'll have the whole area watched. But there's another way." He pointed toward a dark line of hills in the distance. "There's an old mining camp about 2 miles from here. Silas kept a second cache of supplies there. Horses, food, weapons. If we can make it there, we can disappear." They began to move, crawling on their bellies through the tall, dry grass, the house and its chaos shrinking behind them. The soldier continued his patrol, his path slowly bringing him closer and closer to their own. Every snapped twig, every rustle of the wind sounded like a thunderclap. Suddenly a flare shot up from the house, bathing the entire ranch in a brilliant, hissing white light. They were exposed. The soldier saw them immediately. He dropped to one knee, bringing his rifle to his shoulder. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But the shot never came. From a different direction, out near the overgrown road, a rifle cracked. The soldier spun around, clutching his chest, and fell face first into the dirt. He was dead before he hit the ground. Ruby and Edgar stared into the darkness, stunned. Who had fired that shot? It wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't them. A third player had just entered the game. A low whistle cut through the night. It was a signal. Edgar's eyes widened in recognition. He returned the whistle, a different, more complex tune. A figure emerged from the shadows of the trees near the road. It was a woman. She was dressed in buckskin, carrying a long rifle, and moved with the silent grace of a ghost. "Took you long enough, Elena," Edgar grumbled as she approached. The woman smiled, a flash of white teeth in the dim light. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, fell on Ruby. "So this is the Callahan girl. You have his fire." She turned back to Edgar. "Webb's other 2 men are circling from the north. The sheriff and his 3 deputies are trying to put out the fire on the porch. The lawyer, Baxter, is hiding in the barn like the snake he is." Ruby's head was spinning. "Who are you?" "My name is Elena," the woman said simply. "My father was one of the men who served with yours. He was supposed to get a share of that gold. He died before he could claim it. I'm here to collect on his behalf." Edgar sighed. "Elena's been watching the Watchers. She has a vested interest in making sure the right people get that gold." "And a vested interest in making sure the wrong people don't," Elena added, her eyes glinting. "Captain Marcus Webb. That was his name. The man I just shot. He was your father's commanding officer. He believes that gold belongs to him, to fund a new confederacy. He's not a treasure hunter, girl. He's a zealot. And he will not stop until he has the gold, or you're all dead." So this was the true enemy. Not just a greedy soldier, but a fanatic leading a cause. The stakes were suddenly much higher than just money. "The sheriff is a problem," Elena continued, her voice all business. "Webb probably promised him a cut in exchange for getting you out of the way legally. Now that's gone wrong. Things are about to get bloody. We need to split their forces." "How?" Ruby asked, her mind starting to work like her father's, seeing the battlefield instead of the ranch. "You and Edgar, you head for the mining camp. Get the horses, the supplies. Create a distraction along the way, something to pull Webb's remaining men in that direction," Elena instructed. "I will deal with a good sheriff and his pet lawyer." It was a crazy plan. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But it was the only plan they had. As Ruby and Edgar slipped away into the darkness, heading for the hills, she heard a commotion from the direction of the barn. A man's scream cut short, followed by a single gunshot. Elena worked fast. The trek to the mining camp was a nightmare. They moved through rocky gullies and thorny brush, always listening for the sounds of pursuit. Twice they saw the distant flicker of lanterns as Webb's men swept the fields behind them. Edgar, showing a surprising strength for an old man, set a grueling pace. "Your father taught me how to move without being seen," he panted as they paused behind a rock outcropping. "Taught me how to live off the land." He was more than a soldier. He was a survivor. He looked at Ruby, his expression serious. That's the real inheritance he left you. Not the gold, the instinct to survive. They reached the camp just before dawn. It was little more than a collection of rotting shacks clinging to the side of a hill. But in the most intact cabin, hidden beneath a false floor, was the supply cache. Rifles, food, water, and most importantly, two strong horses, saddled and ready. As they were loading the saddlebags, they heard it. Gunfire from back at the ranch. A lot of it. A full-blown firefight had broken out. Elena's making her move, Edgar said grimly. She's drawn them all into one place. That's our chance. But as he spoke, a new sound reached them. The thunder of hoofbeats coming up the trail toward the camp. And it wasn't one horse, it was a half dozen. They weren't being pursued by Webb's two remaining men. They had been followed by the sheriff and his deputies. Elena hadn't been drawing them in. She had been flushing them out, right toward Ruby and Edgar. It was a trap. Elena wasn't their ally. She was the fourth player. She played us, Ruby hissed, grabbing her rifle. She used us to split up the groups so she could take them out one by one. They scrambled for cover behind the abandoned mining equipment as Sheriff Morrison and his three deputies thundered into the camp, guns drawn. "Nowhere left to run, Pratt," the sheriff yelled, dismounting. "Give us the girl and tell us where the gold is, and I might let you live." "You were never going to arrest us, were you?" Edgar called out from behind a rusted ore cart. "The warrant was just an excuse to get on the property," Morrison laughed. "Baxter was our ticket in. A shame he had to have an accident back at the barn. Now the gold." The firefight was short and brutal. Ruby and Edgar were pinned down, outnumbered. But these weren't soldiers. They were greedy lawmen, clumsy and overconfident. Ruby used the skills her father had taught her, making every shot count, aiming for cover to create ricochets, forcing them to keep their heads down. Edgar provided covering fire while Ruby slipped from their position, circling around the back of the cabins. She found the deputies' horses and, with a few slaps and a yell, sent them galloping back down the mountain. Their escape route was gone. Now the hunters were the hunted. She picked them off one by one. A deputy who got careless and stood up from behind a water trough. Another who tried to make a run for a better position. Soon it was just Sheriff Morrison left, hiding behind the main cabin. "Callahan!" he screamed, his voice raw with panic. "You're a dead woman!" "Not today," she called back. She lit the stick of dynamite Edgar had given her from the supply cache and tossed it onto the cabin's dry, rotting roof. The explosion was tremendous, sending flaming shingles everywhere. Sheriff Morrison ran out, screaming, his clothes on fire. His reign of corruption was over. As the smoke cleared, Ruby and Edgar stood in the ruins of the camp, breathing heavily. They had survived, but it wasn't over. They could still hear sporadic gunfire from the ranch. Webb was still out there, and so was Elena. "She's the real threat," Edgar said, reloading his rifle. "Webb is a soldier fighting for a cause. Elena, she's fighting only for herself. She's more dangerous." "So what's the plan?" Ruby asked, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "We go back," Edgar said. "We end this tonight. That gold has cost enough lives. It's time to claim it." They rode back toward the ranch, not as fugitives, but as predators. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. They found the scene of a battle near the corral. Two of the sheriff's deputies lay dead. Nearby were the bodies of Webb's other two men, and slumped against a fence post, clutching a pistol in one hand and a bloody knife in the other, was Captain Marcus Webb. He was still alive, barely. A single gunshot wound was in his gut. "The woman," he gasped as they approached. "She shot me from the shadows after I took care of the lawmen." He coughed, a spray of blood dotting his lips. "She's in the house, going for the gold. My gold, for the cause." His eyes burning with a fanatic's fire, even in death, fixed on Ruby. "Your father was a traitor." Then his head slumped to his chest. He was gone. Elena was in the house, alone, believing everyone else was dead. "She doesn't know about the main bunker entrance in the kitchen," Edgar whispered. "She'll be looking for another way in, or trying to blast her way through the floor. We still have the element of surprise." They crept into the ruined house. The place was a wreck. torn apart by the firefight. They could hear sounds from the kitchen, the rhythmic thump of a sledgehammer against wood. Elena was trying to break through the floorboards above the bunker. They slipped down the hidden stairs, entering the silent, stone-walled arsenal. The gold sat waiting, gleaming in the lamplight. "We can't fight her in here," Ruby said, her mind racing. "It's a tomb." She looked at the stacks of gold bars and an idea sparked. A dangerous, insane idea that felt like something her father would have come up with. "We don't have to fight her. We just have to make it impossible for her to win." She grabbed the plunger for the explosives, the one they'd used on the porch. Wires still ran from it into the walls of the bunker. "Edgar, where do these wires lead?" Edgar's eyes followed the wires to the ceiling. "They're connected to the support beams. Silas always said if the ranch was ever truly lost, he'd bring the whole damn thing down on their heads." The thumping from above stopped. They heard Elena's footsteps moving away from the kitchen toward the main staircase. She was coming to look for another entrance. She would find the one in the office. "Get the horses ready," Ruby said, her hand resting on the plunger. "Load them with as much gold as they can carry. I'll meet you at the well." "Ruby, no," Edgar pleaded. "That's everything. 20 years of work." "It's just metal, Edgar," she said, her voice filled with a certainty she hadn't known she possessed. "My father's legacy isn't in this room. It's in me." Edgar hesitated for a moment, then nodded grimly. He began stuffing gold bars into saddlebags, his movements swift and efficient. Ruby waited, listening. She heard the footsteps overhead, moving down the second-floor hallway. She heard the creak of the office door opening. Then a triumphant cry as Elena discovered the filing cabinets and knew she was close. Edgar scrambled out the tunnel to the well. Ruby gave him a 60-second head start. She could hear Elena upstairs now, frantically trying to find the hidden entrance to the bunker she assumed must be there. Ruby took one last look at the fortune that had caused so much death, then ran for the tunnel. As she emerged from the well, she saw Edgar with the horses, heavily laden but ready. He looked at her, his face a question. She didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand down on the plunger. There was a deep, groaning roar from the earth beneath them. The ground shook violently. The massive ranch house, the monument to madness and secrets, seemed to sigh. And then, with a sound like the end of the world, it imploded. The roof, the walls, the floors, everything collapsed inward, falling into the great hollow space of the bunker below. A massive cloud of dust and debris billowed into the dawn sky, marking the grave of Silas Ward, Marcus Webb, Sheriff Morrison, and the treacherous Elena, and the grave of the Confederate gold. Ruby and Edgar stood in silence for a long moment, watching the dust settle. They hadn't gotten it all, not even close, but they had enough, more than enough to start over, to build something new. "Well, Miss Callahan," Edgar said, his voice filled with a deep and profound respect, "I believe you've passed the test. Your father would be exceptionally proud." Ruby looked at the rising sun, at the wide-open land that was now truly hers. She had walked into a ghost story and come out the other side a warrior. She had inherited more than a ranch. She had inherited a legacy of survival, and she was just getting started. If you enjoyed this story of grit and gold, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we have countless more tales of the untamed West coming your way. And if you have a story about an inheritance that came with a deadly catch, share it in the comments below. We read every single one. Thanks for watching.